Judd Apatow, thank you for coming to my humble little home.
Welcome to Two Guys in Black Shirts.
Would you describe this place as garage sale or more National Geographic gift shop?
You know, this is how I want to live. This is like how I would be if my wife would let me. You know, I have tons of stuff. I always say it's not hoarding if all your shit is awesome. Right?
That's my life philosophy.
You know, exactly. I want a place for my cassettes and my CDs. I want my vinyl and my books. Like, I love it.
Do you still have a lot of that stuff, or is it all in storage? Or are you the kind of person that gives your books away?
No, I don't give anything away. I have trouble throwing out T-shirts.
Yeah.
Like because every T-shirt's like an era or a memory. So I'll have
from like old comedy club T-shirts and stuff.
Weird T-shirts of like the original Comedy Channel, the Ha Channel. Like, I can't throw out my Ha Channel. It doesn't even exist anymore. This is a great T-shirt. Yeah, I have trouble throwing stuff out. It really is like losing memories because I don't have a great memory. So I like things like photographs and physical objects and audio because I think I always feel like, oh, everything is slipping away.
I do too. And, you know, forever I highlight my books when I read them. So it's always great to refresh myself on a book. All I have to do is pull it off the shelf and I can read the highlights like I did with Sick in the Head before the last few days before we came in.
I do that with self-help books. But then I like open up a book that I highlighted 10 years ago and I could see like what my problems were based on what I highlighted.
Do you ever think, oh, I solved that one?
Yeah, why do I hate myself? Oh, why did I write that 10 years ago? And they're like, well, I still hate myself. I didn't solve this problem.
So you really are, you're a voracious consumer of self-help books?
Yeah. I'm trying to reduce it. I mean, I don't, you know, I always think I'm going to find like one simple idea. And that's what I've been trying to do lately. Like, can I reduce all self-help to like 2 paragraphs or 2 sentences?
What would that be?
Well, lately it's groundlessness. I like all these Buddhist books about groundlessness, that all your pain comes from trying to make things solid, trying to define things. And so it's all about like dropping the storyline and just being open. Like if you have an opinion on something, you're already closed in some way to experiencing it. And the idea that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, that life is constantly changing, most of life is suffering in some way. You know, my therapist always says, life is suffering and you soldier on regardless. And to just be in that space where that's okay.
Buddha thought that our possessions led to our sufferings.
Yeah.
So by that theology, I'll never be happy because...
He didn't mean this. He didn't get to see this. You don't get this sitting under a tree for a year.
Well, I remember years ago, I did this forum. You ever hear of the forum?
The forum, which is like Ests, right? It was one of those like...
I mean, I did it like 30 years ago when I lived here because a girlfriend I dated at the time did it.
It was a little pyramid scheme, the forum.
Was it really?
Because you had to bring other people into it. And so it was...
And that was the thing I didn't like about it, and that's where they lost me.
Well, I think that's where they lost everyone, because it's like those things where you have to sell like the pants. So you sell your pants, but then you have to get 8 other people to also sell pants. There's that documentary.
It was a weird thing because at the end of it, this is the most important day of your life, and they would have, people would call their parents or whoever, family members, to fly out at the last minute with no advanced booking to be there on this final day where they would get up and the whoever had done the class would go, you know, and I've made this declaration to be a better person and I needed you here. And it was like, really? You had your mom fly across country? You couldn't have like told her on the phone?
Mom, now you have to pay $100 to take this class and you got to get 6 more people to join this class or I'm fucked. I know it's funny because there's usually a core of a good idea in there, you know, with all these things like Scientology, like they're based on some old Dale Carnegie speech or, you know, some Buddhist idea that at some point it turns into money, or, you know, and I'm sure just all religions in some way. It's like, all right, but how much money are you going to give us? That's what I like about Buddhism is it doesn't seem like anyone's getting rich on Buddhism.
And they're not out actively trying to convert people.
Well, a lot of the Buddhist monks, like if you go to Thailand, they're just in the street and they eat what people will give them. You know?
Yeah, and and you see them in Hong Kong, like you see real Buddhist monks in Thailand, but in Hong Kong, there's like a lot of people that dress up as Buddhist monks, and it's a scam.
Yeah.
And they tell you that a real monk wouldn't be begging for money. You see them in front of like nightclubs and stuff. Those aren't like the
Nightclub Buddhists, trouble. Nightclub Buddhists. But then there's the Buddhists in like, is it Myanmar?
Miramar.
That's at the hotel of the country. but they're violent Buddhists, who attack the Muslims. Like, so, there's a dark side to every religion. But I like the core idea.
They screwed it up for all Buddhists, because that could be the example of, the one religion that's not violent. Then they are the exception to the rule.
Yeah, there's always a little break-off group. We're the violent Buddhists. We're the Buddhists who'll kill you. But I do like the basic idea of just letting go, just surrender. It doesn't totally work for me. I wish it did completely, but it gets me part of the way.
But you always have 9 million projects going on. So how is it possible for you to like surrender and live in the moment and relax for a minute? If I've got this deadline and then 4 other movie projects I'm working on.
Well, that's the struggle. Is why do anything? That's the question. What is the point of any of it? And so I have to constantly think. Am I doing this as an ego trip? Am I doing this? To constantly seek some sort of credibility, to get approval. Is it all just a fight against low self-esteem? Is it a fight against death? Is it like what's the reason to work at all in the creative arts? And the pure reason
to leave your mark. All we have to leave after we're dead is the art that we leave behind. That's what I've.
And is that ego to feel the need to do that, or maybe the pure way to think about it is. It's an expression of my life and my ideas and things I'm interested in, and I hope it does some good for someone else. I hope it inspires someone else or gives somebody a moment of joy in some way, and that's kind of it. And to not be so obsessed on the world conquest aspect of it. Like when you hear about musicians or movie stars and they just have to be number one in the world, or they have to win that award, to try not to be doing it for that reason. That's why stand-up's fun, because you get up, you have this, interaction with a group of people, and it's just for that moment, and it's beautiful. Hopefully it went well. Sometimes it's awesome when it didn't go well, and then it just dissipates, and it's gone, except maybe in their hearts and minds in some way. And you could think of a movie like that, or a documentary, or a TV show in the same way. Like, here's a little offering. I hope it touched you. I hope it does something for you. And it's not really about making the world love you in some way. You're just trying to say something to people.
Well, you think about like Charlie Chaplin movies are over 100 years old and they're still making people laugh.
Yeah.
It's harder for, how much comedy lasts and is still relevant over a period of time. There's so many things that I want to talk to you about comedy, and the 14-year-old comedy nerd in me is in heaven right now. Yeah. But I want to start by, I want to be completely honest with you. I've seen you many times at the Comedy Store since I moved here 7 years ago. And you told me a few times that you liked my podcast and you wanted to do it. And so I'm thrilled you're finally here and we're doing this. But to be honest with you, I thought you were bullshitting me. I thought this is just some Hollywood guy, and he's just, not that you're a Hollywood guy, because you're in a different pantheon, because we're in the same tribe. We're comedians, so but I just thought it was like, I thought you were bullshitting me.
Yeah.
And then I witnessed a suicide, and I talked about it on my podcast and about the PTSD that I had, and it was a really brutal experience for me. And you sent me a text and you said, "Hey man, I thought that was a great episode, and you're really brave for talking about it, and I really think this is going to help a lot of people." You sent me this really beautiful text, and I was like, "Oh my God, he really does listen to the occasional episode."
He's not a bullshit; he's a partial bullshit.
No, but I was so touched by the text, and it was a real serious, raw thing that I experienced, and then because you reached out to me, the timing of it was so beautiful because I witnessed that suicide November 19th, 2020. And then I was at probably one of my lowest points in my life for like the next 4 months.
Yeah.
It kept playing over and over in my head. And then the January 6th insurrection thing happened. And I mean, I was really, I did not see joy in the world or in life at that moment. I was really in a dark place. And the thing that really pulled me out of it was your Garry Shandling documentary, The Zen Diaries. And I was here by myself, spending so much time by myself, and comedy, Garry Shandling, this documentary lifted me out of that hole. And I told you, after you texted me, I was like, so sweet of you to send out to me. And I told you that one of the things that helped me the most and come out of that black hole was this Garry Shandling documentary.
And what parts of it were helpful?
There's so much commonality to stories with comedians, and we're going to talk about the George Carlin documentary that you did, and there's common themes in there also. But a big thing is just the low self-esteem, the beating yourself up constantly as a comedian, never giving yourself credit. Because I worshipped Garry Shandling, and I still to this day, I think Larry Sanders Show is one of the greatest comedy shows ever made. I loved that show, and I loved Shandling and his stand-up, and I thought he was so unique and he was so beautiful, and his self-deprecation, his self-loathing, and just being taken out of my problems to just identify with my tribe of comedians, and just the ups and downs that he went through in his career, and I know you were close to him. And
Yeah, well, I think that, for me, it's funny you say that because like I wasn't feeling good in the last week, and I had COVID, and I was like, you never know what's the COVID fog and what's depression, and you just, went through a cycle of releasing the movie and the book Sicker in the Head, and just like a lot going on, giving out a lot of stuff, and then getting sick, and I was like, God, I just feel off, and I just picked up the Shandling scrapbook there.
And then you sent me the when I told you how much the documentary you sent to me, you sent me the Shandling scrapbook you made.
Because there was so much writing in the Garry Shandling documentary about Buddhism and just him writing notes to himself to try to
That's
keep
self-help
his shit
stuff, and I've
together.
done that for years when I've read stuff and like just self-help motivational things about. I always say, as a comedian, you have to be your own Bundini Brown. The way Muhammad Ali, that was Muhammad Ali's corner man, the guy who was always in his corner his whole career. And I would say, as a comedian, you got to be that person within your own head to get off the ropes, champ.
Yeah.
You're great.
No, it's tough. I mean, you're almost creating a voice in your head, a character. I mean, I have a thing on my phone in my notes, and it just says Judd's life coach. But it's just things, just things I want to remind myself, or a self-help thing that hits for some reason. And it's always the same thing. I always think about Ram Dass, who says in the documentary, you want to live in your heart, not in your head. It's all bad here. It's all good here. And, loving kindness, loving awareness, drop the storyline is one that helps me just, drop the storyline. Just be here now. The simple stuff in the scrapbook, you see Garry writing all these things, and they're beautiful, but you realize what he's not writing was what he's really thinking. That's the response voice. We're not hearing the panicked, insecure voice flailing around. So he writes these incredible things that, are from him, but from probably the ideas of whatever, Buddha, Eckhart Tolle, whoever he's into at the time. And so with a documentary like The Zen Diaries of Garry Shandling, which is on HBO for anyone who wants to see it, that's like what I was saying. Like, you make something and you put it out there, and you hopefully do it with as little ego as possible. And you go, I hope it reached someone. I hope it touched someone. So you're in a bad moment.
It did what comedy's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it helped me. And I think also, like this and the George Carlin documentary that you just made, I mean, and the You're Sick in the Head books, that these are tools that people will be able to use forever, who love comedy and want to study
Yeah.
the artistry of it.
Yeah, that's what I hope, you know, and it is one of those things where you just make it and you just put it out there and you don't know what it's doing. So like the first Sick in the Head book, because it has all these people that we all admire in it talking about how they make comedy, why they make comedy, how they're doing as people, how they're trying to evolve as people. And, you know, it's Chris Rock and it's Jon Stewart and so many people that we look up to. You know that somewhere there's some 17-year-old kid reading it who's thinking about writing jokes or doing something creative, and you just hope something someone said there lands for them and gives them a little gas to give it a shot. You know?
Yeah, and there's just always seemed like I think it was Amy Schumer. There was some like horribly embarrassing incident that she had written about. I think that was a breakthrough she had as a comedian, and it just seems like there's a common theme for a lot of comedians of overcoming this this voice in your brain that's always telling you you're shit. Why would people listen to you? You're worthless.
Yeah, it's a really powerful voice, and I've had it lately. Like, and I say to myself, why does it always come back?
Even at your level, you don't go, hey.
No, I mean, I can fully just spin out of like, and I do have to go like, oh, you did this and you did that. Like, you've done a couple good things, but there's just a voice saying, shut the fuck up. Like, there's a beat down voice. And then you go, what is the source of that attitude that's in your head? And, you know, in some ways, you know, I've had therapists say, you know, your brain thinks it's trying to protect you. You know, your mind thinks, if I could get you to just sit in the apartment all day long, under the covers, watching 90 Day Fiancé, you're safe. You won't die. And so there is almost a broken, you know, fight or flight response that thinks, I need to keep you safe by just making you take no chances. And so if you look at it like that, like, oh, my brain thinks it's helping me by telling me, don't do anything. And you have to fight through that and go, it's okay, I'm fine. But it is a powerful voice. And I find it a little maddening because I'm like, man, you'd think it would just go away at some point. And I have to like remind myself of, you know, there are games I'll play with myself. I'll think of one or two things I've done that I'm proud of, like the Garry Shandling documentary. And I'll try to think, well, that's enough. You know, so everything else is just it's a swing at the plate. But I did one or two things that I think worked out the way I wanted them to, and just stay focused on that. But you know, when you're alone with a piece of paper and you're trying to start something new, that voice is like, don't do it. It's not going to work. And that's the thing that we all have to do is say, okay, shut up. I'm going to do it anyway. And to have some pride that we do, because I always say to people who want to get into the creative arts, everybody quits. Like, most people hear that voice and they just stop.
Well, it's fighting through the fear. I know for the first 5 years I did stand-up, I was terrified. And I had to fight through the fear because I loved it and I knew it's what I wanted to do. Yeah. And even now, like at the Comedy Store, like this week is the Netflix is a joke comedy festival. So like every great comedian from New York and London and just all these brilliant comedians. And so, you know, I've got new bits that I'm working on, and you go there and you see these other guys crushing and you're like, oh, geez, and you know, start worrying. But there's this magic transformation that happens when I get on stage and it's like, well, now this is my slice of the pie and I can do whatever I want with it. And then once that first laugh happens, all the fear is gone. The anxiety that's been building like a tornado all afternoon until the moment I get on stage.
I didn't even do anything for the festival because I hosted the Directors Guild Awards. I worked really hard to, you know, which is, you know, a non-televised, but like Oscars type show. Like Spielberg's there and Spike Lee, they're all right there. But it's not televised, and I really enjoy doing it because it's like my little private Oscars, you know? and it's fun. And I make little sketches for it and work so hard on it, and it went great. Couldn't have gone better. As well as I've ever done doing stand-up. But then when it was time to go back to stand-up post-pandemic, I thought, I don't really know who I am right now. I don't know if I'm cynical or angry or annoyed or melancholy. And I haven't really been able to start writing the new set. And I've been busy finishing other projects, but I'm about to go to New York. And I thought, I'm just going to sign up for a ton of sets at the Cellar and force myself to figure it out. And I really don't know. I don't have because if you're pissy, it's easy to do stand-up. What the fuck is with this? And
Yeah,
this
right,
fucker
right.
isn't- And it's a great point of view, the annoyance with life. And then some people are more bemused with life, or they, become surreal in some way. And some people are just storytellers. And sometimes I think, I kind of don't know what my emotion is that I'm writing from, because I know my core emotion lately is like troubled terror, right? Just the world seems crazy.
Right.
And I feel kind of down about it. I don't feel super optimistic. And I don't really want to write jokes from that place. So I almost have to create a persona to write jokes from. I even in my head thought, maybe I'll just like pick an attitude and just write a bunch of jokes as if it's not me. Like create a character and it's just to get it going. And then it'll reveal itself on stage. I'll find it. But it is tricky to start post-pandemic because the world has changed. And I don't want to do the jokes I was telling before the pandemic. I don't feel like I'm that person anymore.
Well, the pandemic taught me a number of things. Number one, it taught me how much I love sleeping in my own bed. I'm not doing the road at all anymore. And thank God I don't have to. And I didn't realize how bad I needed a year off. And that's another thing, like a common thing, like in the Carlin documentary, how just the constant travel, and he was away from his wife, and
it destroyed him.
She did everything, the marketing and the PR and booking dates and all this stuff. And then when he got famous, he had a team of people doing that, and she felt like she didn't have an identity of her own. I know the constant travel has killed every relationship I was ever in, and then also that was a thing with my ex-wife, who I'm still really good friends with. She didn't feel like she had an identity of her own because it was all about my career. So like there's just these constant recurring themes in the story of comedians' lives. For me, comedy is my religion, my political party. So these stories are biblical to me.
Well, it's a fascinating story, Carlin, because he started, 1960 in a comedy team. Then they break up. He was with Jack Burns, who was later in Burns and Schreiber. And then he meets his wife, Brenda. She works at the club.
She was a waitress at the Dayton club?
Yeah, and then a few months later, they're married. And what's weird was a few weeks before we were completely done with the documentary, his daughter, Kelly Carlin, who was a producer on it and was the main voice of the documentary, said, I hate to tell you this, but I just found a big bag of their love letters and their letters to each other from their whole lives. And we're like, oh God, now we got to read all these. And
wow,
what did we not put in that we should have? And they start out literally like the day after they met, and then a letter after the first time they had sex, and then a letter asking, talking about let's get married, and it's like just a few weeks after they met. But then it turns into we're broke, and then letter to her parents asking for money because they only have $7 in the bank, and letters from him on the road. And this was interesting because this is like being on the road in '62 or around that time. He would go on the road. If the headliner got sick and the show got canceled, he's like in the Midwest, and you wouldn't just like zip home on a jet. You would call your manager and go, is there anywhere I can play? I'm stuck here in Illinois. What can we do? And then suddenly he doesn't have work for the next 2 weeks, but he doesn't want to go home because he can't really afford the plane to do it. And it was like, wow, that was a rough life. There weren't that many job opportunities if you weren't in at the big places.
And he says this thing, it's that first time when he decides to go off the road, when he wanted to give up that old Danny Kaye want to be on television persona for when he became like the counterculture long hair beard guy, where he took a year off the road and stayed in Greenwich Village and just worked on his new act, whatever he wanted, the next incarnation of himself that he wanted to do. But he says the line, he's on some interview thing, and it's in the documentary. He goes, I can't do the road. There's no money in it. It's you spend all your money on the traveling, and that's it. That's still, whenever he said that in like the late '60s, that's been a constant theme in my life and many other comedians.
And he had problems with the IRS. He didn't do his taxes properly or at all at some point. It's a little bit of a mystery how he screwed up his taxes right when he was successful. And then suddenly he owed, I would assume, millions to the government, and there's interest on it. And now he's on the road constantly just paying off the government and got himself in this really bad cycle. And that made him the kind of person who was away from his family.
So then
way
he
too
had
much.
to be on the road
Had
to
be
keep
on the
the money
road.
coming in.
And his wife is now an alcoholic because this life is not working out for her, and she's depressed, and her husband's never home, and her dreams aren't being fulfilled in any way. And he's on cocaine, and now he's
Which really opens you up emotionally.
exactly. He's literally doing binges alone. We're just writing jokes and listening to music, and he's not partying with people. He's just doing a lot of cocaine by himself. It appears, and then they come home and fight around Kelly, and it sounds like a really harrowing childhood. And then it becomes a little bit of a triumph that they survived it and they didn't break up and they, got sober and worked it out. And I think he had struggles with addiction afterwards, but for the most part, a lot of that got resolved. And then tragically, his wife died, relatively young.
It's a beautiful love story throughout it, and that they stayed together, through the alcoholism and the drug addiction. And it's a beautiful story with the daughter Kelly, and they're in Hawaii, and they have that kind of UN peace treaty.
Yeah.
That the wife is going to give up the booze, and he's going to give up the coke, and just how that family stayed together is
it's a
showbiz miracle.
I mean, most people wouldn't, and so that's the part that interests me the most. I'm also interested in how does someone stay engaged creatively, for 5 decades? How do you stay current? How do you keep changing and evolving with the times? And that's what's so interesting right now, as the Roe versus Wade disintegrates in front of us. Suddenly, everyone turns to George Carlin because he had these routines. In 1996, he did his big, they don't care about life. The second you're born, they don't care about you. And so he is one of the, the rare people that the material gets better with age.
That's my thing with Carlin. I wasn't a fan of his early work. I loved everything he did. Like the period that a lot of people were turned off by him, like the end years, I think was his greatest work. And for me, he's the greatest shining example for a comedian that you can actually get better with age. Mm-hmm. And, I love the documentary so strong, especially where, he got, I never liked the hippy dippy weatherman and all that period of Carlin where he was like the stoner counterculture guy. And then what was it? SCTV ridiculed him over his weird peas observations and all that, which pissed him off. Mm-hmm. And then Kinnison's comes out, and then he gets not frightened, but he got inspired that, here these people are making fun of me for being this kind of dork observationalist, and I know I've got all these raw feelings about the world and this country, what's happening. And for me, that's his best his best work.
Well, he did the thing that most people don't do, which is he redoubled his efforts. He saw where it was going. So he was popular in the 70s, but then people started making fun of him because he was probably running out of gas. He put out a lot of records. It was a lot of material. He was one of the few people that was really making a record every year. So after 5-6 hours of material, it's getting kind of corny, and everyone starts making fun of him. Like SCTV's brutal doing impressions of him. It was like Death of a Salesman with.
I had never seen that before until the documentary.
I mean, it's online. So the whole thing. It's like a 15-minute sketch where he plays one of Willie Loman's children, and it's like Dave Thomas is playing like DeForest Kelley as one of the sons of Willie Loman, which is played by Ricardo Montalban. Joe Flaherty is Ricardo Montalban, and George Carlin is the other one of Willie Loman's kids. And it's so mean and so well observed, and that along with Cheech Marin saying George Carlin's over, he's just talking about peas, and that made him get funnier. He didn't crumble. He got funnier and he went deeper, and then another 10 years later, he saw Sam Kinison, and he thought, I don't want to be the corny guy.
Yeah.
He was like, I got to keep up with what people are doing. And then when you watch the rest of his career, and it got very dark and intense, it makes sense that was a reaction to Sam Kinison. Because he
just the fearlessness, especially someone who's made their name in show business. You've got a certain cachet of being able to play theaters. And there's just the times in his career, and Bill Burr says it beautifully in the thing, like compares him to Miles Davis. So the brilliant thing about Miles Davis, he had completely changed his style like 6 times. But those dangerous, risk-taking career moments where Carlin just put everything on hold and tried to take it higher. I remember when Kinison came out and I loved him and I thought he was dangerous, but like a lot of his stuff doesn't age well.
Well, it ran out of gas. I mean, I saw him in '86 for the first time at the clubs.
That was when he was...
That was right before he hit. I mean, he had done the Dangerfield special, and he was on Saturday Night Live and did stand-up on Saturday Night Live. And we did a benefit for Comic Relief. That was my first job as like a production assistant at Comic Relief. So he did a benefit at the Comedy Store, and half the place had never heard of him. He hadn't really broken through big yet. And he walked half the place. And then the people who stayed, it was one of the great things they've ever seen. I mean, Kinison didn't care. People just got up in droves. I'd never seen that before, or since, really, where someone goes so hard that the place is like, we need to leave. And then the people who decided to stay, it was the best night of their lives. And that was maybe the most exciting night I've ever seen in comedy. A crowd that didn't know Kinison encountering Kinison when he was at his best. But then quickly turned into, drugs and rock and roll, and he was on a different kind of celebrity trip.
Yeah,
and
like
the material didn't keep up with it.
That third album he put out, it was like half rock and roll cover songs, and it was...
Again, if you're not really focused on what you're saying, like George Carlin was always obsessed on what he was saying. If you get caught up in a lot of the other trappings, and obviously addiction, you're not going to do your best.
One of my favorite Carlin things is, I don't know if you've ever heard the audio book for When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops? It's great. It's just he's basically just reading all these jokes.
Yeah.
He was in a sound booth and he's got, because that's what he's reading the book, and it's just great to just listen to him just a barrage of one-liners and silly observations.
That's probably the one thing that I think the documentary neglects, which is he would make these books like brain droppings with like 1,000 mini observation and jokes, some of them political, a lot of them just silly. And I don't think the documentary really takes like a few minutes to go deep into the ridiculous wordplay stuff. Some of it's pretty remarkable. But it's funny because I looked at your shelf and you had this one, which I guess is all of his books in one big book. But in it, I opened up to this. In an earlier book, Brain Droppings, I wrote some things about politically correct language, but left out a few areas. I neglected 3 important groups of people who have had this awkward, dishonest language inflicted on them by liberals. I omitted those who are crippled, ugly, or stupid. And so to address these omissions, I'd like to make a brief visit to that playground of guilty white liberals' political correctness. Political correctness is America's newest form of intolerance, and it's especially pernicious because it comes disguised as tolerance. It presents itself as fairness, yet attempts to restrict and control people's language with strict codes and rigid rules. I'm not sure that's the way to fight discrimination. I'm not sure if silencing people or forcing them to alter their speech is the best method for solving problems that go much deeper than speech. And then he goes really hard and does a lot of really troubling jokes. But it's interesting because he was talking about all these issues a really long time ago, and now it's really exploded. And I guess the core idea is, are you allowed to hurt people's feelings? And I think that a lot of that has to do with the comedy club format, because you get all different types of comedians. So if you want a very soft comedian, you might get a hard one at a comedy club. And also the idea that I think due to Netflix and social media and streaming, that I think everybody thinks that everything is for everybody. When I was younger, I thought, well, some people like country music, some people like Metallica, but the country music people are not listening to Metallica. But I think in our current culture, the Metallica is played for you. And if you're a Metallica fan, the country music is played for you. And then everyone is shocked that certain people really hate certain pieces of music or art or movies or comedy or TV. Everything really isn't for everybody. And that's why I think so many people are offended, because in the old days, if you didn't like Don Rickles, you just wouldn't go to a Don Rickles concert.
Yeah.
But now it would just be in your face all the time. And then you're like, no, I don't like that. That doesn't make me happy. That's wrong.
Well, we live in an age of extremism. Everything is extreme, and it seems like you have to be extreme on social media to get attention, and everyone feels entitled to criticize and be cruel about anything they disagree with.
I always think that comedians are just characters, right? So when I go to a club, and there's certainly jokes that I think it's fine to say, that joke sucks, or that joke's mean. I don't think there's anything wrong with people speaking up and going like, what you're saying there is awful, right? Like, we're all in a giant conversation, and that's okay. But there's a big difference between that and you shouldn't work.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Because all comedy is an experiment, and we all fail all the time. And so I think comedians sometimes think, I'm not supposed to be criticized. But, if I make a movie, you can shit on it. If I make a TV show or a documentary, and if you do stand-up, people are allowed to say they don't like it and why they don't like it. But that's very different from, you shouldn't get a special. Yeah. You shouldn't be on TV. But because when I go to a club, sometimes, and if I'm just watching, I'll always think to myself, I'm not supposed to like all these people. It's like going to the zoo. Like, there are people and they're really mean on stage. And if I can get in the right spirit, I could just get a kick out of their attitude. And it's just funny they want to say that. It's funny they believe that. And then someone else might be kind of really like sweet. Their observations are very gentle, and maybe they're insightful or surreal in some way. And go, oh, that's a different character. And that's what comedy is in a comedy club. Like at the Comedy Store, if there's 12 people, you're getting a whole bunch of different characters. But there are certain people that watch it and they're just like, I'm out. I can't believe that person would say that. And the thing I always think about is Howard Stern. When I was a kid, Howard Stern did a bit he got fired for, where he made jokes because there was a plane crash, and he called the airline and he said, when is the next plane going to this bridge? Because a plane had crashed and landed near a bridge. And I remember that he was defending it, and he was like, people's lives are hard, and so for some people, it makes them happy to do the darkest joke ever. Like, to say the worst thing that you could ever say is their release from how hard and awful life can be. And I remember at the time thinking, because I don't love that joke. But if you do love that joke, who am I to say you shouldn't be allowed to have that in your life? The way someone might love death metal or something. And maybe I don't want to hear that. I want to...
Well, like remember when Gilbert Gottfried did the post 9/11 joke about the roast, the connection at the World Trade Center or something. And I remember everybody was so offended by it, and I remember even I was thinking, ooh, that's fucking cruel, because it was right after it. Yeah. But as a comedian, I was like, oh my God, he pushes his balls in a wheelbarrow. Like, just the balls on that guy. I just always admired just the balls of it. And I think that's the thing with the Carlin stuff too. Some people were turned off by his angry wisdom at the end. I thought it was like the purest big dick rock and roll since Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
Well, he's like saying, wake up. It's kind of like the movie Don't Look Up. He was just saying, the world is fucked. We're not taking care of the planet. We're not taking care of each other. We're in danger. All the systems keep hurting us. And so he's hitting you in the head with a bat. And I think we see, just in all the ways that we don't take care of each other. I mean, in California right now, they're about to make it so that you can't use water most of the time. We are literally about to run out of water in California in a very serious way. And if you tell people you can only water your lawn once a week, and they're like, well, it's going to get brown. But no, we're running out of water. Right? So sometimes you need someone to kick you in the face comedically to say, you're asleep. And that's what he did. He went as dark as you can go. And what's funny is now that, he's been gone about 14 years, you re-watch those bits. And sometimes you think, they're not dark enough.
It's funny. There was I have it in the next room. I saw it somewhere and I bought it. It's a DVD of every George Carlin. I think I found it at Barnes and Noble's. Yeah. It's every HBO special he ever did. And I thought, I'm going to work my way. And you put on the first one, and he's like, maybe it was done at UCLA or something.
USC at Bovard, yeah.
The USC, and it's the whole like it's kind of like, hey, it's this new sensation of a comedy special was like a new thing.
Yeah.
And he's kind of commenting on the just the newness of it. Mm-hmm. This is being recorded.
Yeah. It's like I saw this tape of Springsteen. He was in like Kansas City in like 1978, and they had just gotten screens for the first time, the giant screens.
Wow.
And he's like playing guitar, and he's like looking at the screen, and he's like pretending to pick his nose like it was the best joke ever. He couldn't believe that he was up there. But it's funny to see Springsteen's mind blown that people could watch the screen.
I love this technique in storytelling that you use on these documentaries where you take, with Shandling, it was the notebooks, and with Carlin, it was like agendas and notebooks and things. And he had written this note, you can't care and be really funny.
Yeah.
Like,
You can't care if you're offending people. Yeah, you have to just go all the way.
I think he overly cared about humanity, even though
I took it like you can't
saying,
care about their reaction.
Yeah.
That it's okay to lose some people. And I get that. Like if you go like, if you look at the people today, like Bill Burr or something, he's going hard.
Yeah.
He doesn't, it's not all about like caring about your feelings. And that is when you get to explosive comedy. And maybe some people will think, oh, that's too far. But when you're really going for the rafters,
yeah,
I think that's what he means. Like you can't care in that way. There was a note I saw where he said like, the story of America is a story of being seduced and betrayed. Seduced into believing these ideas and then betrayed by all the ways they screw you over.
Did you know Carlin personally? Did you ever meet him?
I met him a couple of times. I think at the Comedy Magic Club, he would try out sets. I saw him at Igby's once, and I remember he got on stage. He basically said, they'd say you can't make jokes about this. And then he just did it hard. And it was rough. Like, oh, they say this is the subject that you're not allowed to make jokes about. And then he would do 8 minutes on it. Oh, they say this is a subject that there's nothing funny about. And then he went at it. And it was like, as far as you've ever seen anyone go. And then I interviewed him for Canadian television when I was about 22. It was the only tape I couldn't find.
Oh my God.
It was the video of me talking to him. But I didn't, he wasn't around. I mean, he's not a guy you would see at the Comedy Store. He didn't behave like he was part of the tribe. He was on his own. I think he was very kind to people. And I kept hearing stories where he would meet a young comedian and he would take their number and then they would say, and out of the blue, 6 months later, he just called me and said, how you doing? How's your career going? And he would chat with them. And that's pretty amazing.
Wow.
Like he would just follow up with random people.
Well, I love Stephen Wright in the documentary. He basically says that he would, Carlin would call him randomly and just lay a joke on him.
Yeah.
I met George Carlin once. In 1995, HBO did the very first Aspen Comedy Festival. Mm-hmm. It was such a magical experience, that festival. And one of the marquee main events of that festival was George Carlin did a Q&A at the Wheeler Opera House. And the whole audience was comedians.
And it was Jon Stewart.
Well, Jon Stewart was asking him questions. And the thing I remember most from that interview, Jon Stewart had asked him about using drugs to write material. Did he ever smoke marijuana to come up with his material? And he said that he never uses drugs or smokes marijuana to write his material. But after he's written his material, at one point, he'll smoke a joint and go back and read it. Mm-hmm. And it's touch-up time. Or punch-up time. That's what he said. That was the funniest thing. And it's punch-up time.
Well, he does say that his whole thing changed because he took acid and mescaline and like the Beatles and R. Crumb. He had one of those experiences where, he took hallucinogens and saw a wider picture.
One of my favorite moments of the documentary is when he's on the talk show. Maybe it was the Dick Cavett show with John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Oh, he's on Mike Douglas show.
And they're asking him questions about comedy.
He's talking about becoming himself on stage. And and you're listening to him, and then they widen out, and you reveal he's saying it to John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and Yoko Ono's like laughing because that's their whole thing, which is, you know, them becoming a pure version of their creative selves out there. And they took huge risks to do the music they were doing at that time. Yeah, every once in a while when you make a documentary, you find a piece of tape.
Gold.
You can't believe it. Like, they had Richard Pryor and George Carlin on the John Davidson summer show in the 60s before either of them went edgy. And they're just in their corniest, we'll do anything to be on TV vibe. And they're wearing sweaters and singing songs. And it's amazing that exists.
Something I learned about you from reading Sick in the Head, we're the same age, and I had never heard anyone else say this, but it was something that, because I knew I wanted to be a comedian since I was 11. My father took me to a show in Washington, D.C., and the
Who do
state.
you see?
My uncle did open, my family's originally from Washington, D.C., and my uncle did open mic nights for 1 year. My father loved stand-up comedy. Yeah. Pryor was his dude. And I remember we had Pryor and Bob Newhart were my dad's favorites. And we had the vinyl records. And I remember driving around with my dad. He would be listening to Richard Pryor record or cassettes or 8-track or whatever it was. And there was no seatbelts. And I was a little kid. And I remember driving as a little kid, standing next to my dad as he drove, listening to Pryor and feeling his shoulders shake when he would laugh. And I just, comedians have always been, you know, wizards of great power since I was a kid. So it was very revered in my household. And then my uncle did open mic nights for 1 year in Washington, D.C. And my dad took me to see him. This place called El Brookman's. The stage is next to the entrance. The show was in progress. We walk in, I'm wearing a Washington Redskins jacket. The comedian on stage pulls me on stage and he interviews me like I'm the coach of the Redskins. And I'm 11. I just gave little dopey, bashful one-word answers.
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
That moment changed my life forever.
Wow.
I'll never forget standing on that stage and seeing all those people with their heads thrown back in laughter and all the teeth in their mouth. And DC is a very diverse city. I remember just a very diverse audience. And to me, when you were on stage doing comedy, you were speaking to the world.
Yeah.
So you had a similar experience where your mother and father got divorced and your mother started working at a comedy club and you went to a show.
Yeah.
You would go to shows and see comedians.
I'd seen a few shows. I remember seeing people at Westbury Music Fair on Long Island. So we went to see Don Rickles, Dangerfield, Toady Fields.
You saw Toady Fields?
Yeah, my grandma was buddies with Toady Fields, so she was there with Bert Convy. And so and she was like a part of our world that Molly was friends with the coolest person in the world, Toady Fields. And that was probably a big part of it, was just the awe in which they talked about her as being this incredibly talented, funny, great person. And I remember seeing her, and she had one leg because she had diabetes, and she just had to have her leg amputated. Wow. And she came out in a golf cart, and just standing ovation, and then did jokes about having one leg. And I don't know if I'm reinventing history, but I do look back and think that as a weird kid, I just thought, look how weird Toady Fields is. And people adore her, and she's getting standing ovations, and she's funny, and she's talking about who she is. And I'm sure I didn't have words for it, but just energetically, I must have thought, that's the coolest thing ever.
The thing that's where I was going to lead that statement to. I got sidetracked. But I did this as a kid because from that moment on, comedy, I became a student of stand-up comedy. And SNL was only, that was 1978. When I was 11, SNL was new, and Carson was my god. And I would take the TV guide and I would highlight when they had a comedian on Mike Douglas. I'd look at all the Johnny Carson. So when there was a comedian on TV, I would be in front of the television watching it. And you say that in Sick in the Head, and I'm like, you know, my tribal brethren.
Yeah. I'd be like, oh, Jeff Altman and Michael Keaton.
Do you see any neutrons in my nose? Like Jeff Altman, he did the weirdest material.
Love them. There's an amazing Gilbert Gottfried podcast from this
with
year.
Jeff Altman?
With Jeff Altman, with amazing stories of that era. and then my mom and dad got divorced, and my mom got a job as a hostess at a comedy club in Southampton, where she moved. And the person that ran it was Rick Messina, who was a bartender at a restaurant my parents owned. And then he started working in comedy, and he later became Drew Carey and Tim Allen's manager, a big manager. But
did you ever thank him for changing your life? I'm sure you did.
I'm sure I have. Oh, I'd say I did. I did in person once at some awards ceremony. But he was nice to my mom and gave my mom this job. I can't imagine what she got paid. I mean, what do you get paid to seat people at a comedy club for a couple hours?
Yeah.
So I always thought she must have done it for me, because I literally, what could she have gotten? $50 to seat people for the night, $80. And then he let me be a dishwasher at the East Side Comedy Club and then a busboy. And that's when I would see Rosie O'Donnell and Eddie Murphy and Bob Nelson and that generation of people. And I secretly always wanted to do it, would never tell anyone. And then started interviewing comedians from my high school radio station. That's what that book is. And then the new book, Sicker in the Head, is, they're all new interviews, except I put an old John Candy interview I did in the 80s in there. But it's like Sacha Baron Cohen and Nathan Fielder and Amber Ruffin, and it's, what's happening now.
Well, I can't wait to read it, because I mean, like Sick in the Head, again, like the Shandling documentary and the George Carlin documentary. I mean, I think these are educational tools for anybody who wants to be a comedian. And someone like me who's been in the business a long time, it just refreshes my love for stand-up. And another thing you say in the book, like in high school, when other kids were like into Led Zeppelin and bands, you were into comedians. And you crystallized it in those words for me, because like when I was 14 and 15, 16, Rodney Dangerfield was my god.
Yeah.
And I found this after my father died. I was looking through his stuff. I went to see Dangerfield when I was 15.
Oh, wow.
This shirt is a medium. And I used to wear this to other kids wearing rock band shirts. I was wearing this Dangerfield.
That's a good one. You could probably sell that for like $800.
I would never sell this. I love it.
I saw him. He talked so fast. Every time you left, you missed 2 jokes at Westbury Music Fair. And then I did Dangerfields, I remember. And I would see him at the Improv every once in a while in the later days. And then he did a Rodney Dangerfield special where he presented young comedians.
Yeah. Those were game changers, and that made Kinnison a star and
Roseanne
all kinds of people.
Bob Saget. And this one, my friend Sid Youngers was on. They did it at UCLA. And I got hired to warm up the crowd and go on in between every comedian when they switched the sets.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty wild to just be around that, because the young comedian special on HBO and those Rodney specials, that was the bar. I mean, if you could get on those shows, that was life-changing.
I remember the excitement of watching those, you know, and those specials were everything. You tell this beautiful story in Sick in the Head about seeing Dangerfield at the Improv, I think it was, and he comes there in a robe, and he's not doing his material, and you said it was really uncomfortable, and he's just like, he's talking to some woman like, yeah, you'll love me. You'd be different or whatever.
Yeah, you'd change my life. Yeah. You're the one. You'd change my life. You'd love me for me, right? You'd love me for me. It was really kind of brutal. And then he said, sometimes life makes perfect sense. And then you come. And Rodney had that thing where he would go on late at night. He would not do the act. And he would do this other thing, which was hysterical and dark and sad. And sometimes the funniest thing ever. Where he just did not give a fuck.
Yeah, you said how beautiful it was. I met him a few times through the years, and he was kind of standoffish.
Yeah.
But I guess seeing a comedian really reveal their true character instead of telling jokes is.
Well, we went to see him at Vegas, me and Sandler and a bunch of comedians and people, like when he was like in his early 80s. And then afterwards, we're hanging out with him, and everyone's like smoking pot with Rodney. And I'm like, Rodney, my grandma was friends with Toady Fields. What did you think of her? And he's like, she was what she was. I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, she was what she was. Who knows what it seemed like the meanest thing you could ever say. It was the most dismissive, terrible thing. But he was such a character. And even then, talking about movies he wanted to make and getting financing, and I got this new script where I'm like a Mormon, I got like 11 wives, and he was always hustling.
Well, you're talking about Toady Fields. When I saw Dangerfield, I saw him at the Tupperware Theater in Orlando, and I had every album memorized, every joke. I mean, I worshipped the guy. He was plastered drunk, and he wasn't that sharp that night. Me and the guy I was with, when the show, we wanted to meet him. There was no security. We snuck backstage. The theater with the big curtains, we just went up the side steps and went in the back. It's dark. There's a light way off in the distance. We head towards the light. And Dangerfield is sitting there. He was already drunk, and he's got his pants off, and his pants are over a chair. I've told this story to so many comedians through the years. I learned that was an old Catskill comedian's trick. Yeah. They would take their pants off to preserve the dry cleaning crease. And he's sitting there in front of a beer, and we're like, Rodney, we love you, Rodney. Hey, you kids.
All right, baby, all right.
Yeah, exactly. And then his road manager comes, and he kicks us out. And we said, we want to talk to Rodney. He goes, he's coming out this door in about 30 minutes. You wait out there. And there's a waiting Lincoln Town car for him. And there's a steel exit door. And he comes out the door 30 minutes later. There's 3 cement steps from the exit door to the waiting Lincoln Town car. And he goes, hey, you kids, give me a hand. And he help me out, will you? He put one arm around me and one arm around my buddy. And I'll never forget carrying this old man's torso down these 3 cement steps. And then we placed him in the back of the waiting Lincoln Town car as if he were the Christ child. Wow. And then the car drove away. And that blew me. Like, here's a guy, an old man in his 70s. Yeah. And I was 15, and it could have been the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin. That's how I felt. He
probably was in his 60s then.
Wow.
I mean, we're his age then.
Wow. He just always seemed like an old man.
He always seemed like an old guy.
Yeah.
But I always thought a lot about him. When we were doing Funny People, I thought a lot about him. Just like people who would put everything into the career, just all their energy.
How have you gotten better as a storyteller now that you've made so many films and documentaries? Because another great thing that you say twice in Sick in the Head is you were told the greatest gift you can give is your story. Yeah. And I've talked with a lot of young comedians and comedian friends about that since I read the book. I think that's the holy grail magic chalice to it all.
Well, it took me a long time to think my story was interesting or was worth anyone hearing. Because again, that's a negative voice. It's like, shut up, no one cares about your story. But as I tried to reveal my inner life, I realized, people are responding way more to it. And I feel like we see this in comedy a lot. John Mulaney has a rough year. He goes on stage. He's very honest about his life and what he's going through. And suddenly he's selling out, arenas because people want that. They could tell when you're authentic and you're sharing something. And so that is the mantra I always get back to. Sometimes I don't have that much to share, and that's the problem. It's not, like I believe I should share my story, but I'm like, nothing's really happening right now that's that interesting. But I do think that's the key, and we see it with so many people who have these specials. I mean, the new special by Judd Carmichael, it's so great because he's
where he comes
so
out
real. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's so present, and he's having this conversation with the crowd. And it's kind of beautiful how the crowd is speaking up and talking to him, and he's answering, and it feels like very natural, almost like you're at a dinner table. And I think people long for that type of experience.
It seems like, you've evolved as an artist and a storyteller because you're dealing more now with coming of age stories, which I think is admirable. I
think all stories are coming of age. I was talking to Norman Lear. Norman's 99. I was talking to him like a year ago. He was just talking about something with his dad. When he was young, his dad went to jail for some sort of stock scam. So when he was a kid, he got sent to an aunt's house who was not happy to have him there. And it's all his book about himself and this documentary about him. But he was talking about his dad and issues with his dad as if it just happened. It literally happened like in the 20s, right? And I just thought, we're all kind of coming of age always. We're always in some version of evolving. And so this idea that coming of age is when you're 13 or when you graduate high school. It's really not true. My kids just moved out, and that's a coming of age moment. Like, what the hell am I going to do now? What is life? How do I organize it? What should I do with my time? What should Leslie and I do as a couple? And I feel like that's the thing that interests me, is that attempt to grow up it just goes on till the end.
Like King of Staten Island deals with the father's death, and This Is 40 deals with getting older. You mentioned your kids moving out. I remember at Montreal meeting you, and briefly, not meeting you, I'd already known you, but briefly getting to hang out with you and your daughter Maud.
Yeah.
Who's now on Euphoria.
Yeah.
And I've only seen a handful of those episodes, and I think I would never have children now. It's like, oh my God. It's like, really? That's what, there's just, wow.
It's an amazing story, Euphoria, because, it's about addiction. It's basically Sam Levinson who is writing from a very personal place about issues he's had with addiction, especially in high school. And so the show's been on for 2 years, and what he did, which is really remarkable, is it's somewhat terrifying, the first run of shows.
Especially the pilot episode, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it really goes all the way. But over 2 years, suddenly it gets really beautiful, and it is about the trauma that changes all these kids and affects their lives and their choices, and then it gets to like this incredible healing place at the end. And a lot of that involves Maud's character, and she did such a remarkable job on it. So yeah, it is funny. I forgot, because I took Maud to Montreal, which is great. I don't remember how old she was. Maybe she was 17,
mid-teen,
or 18,
I think, yeah.
And took her to a bunch of shows. And my kids don't love stand-up. Like, it's a little bit of her doing me a favor to drag her around. But we wound up at this bar that was owned by the band Arcade Fire, like Win Butler. And we're there, and I'm with Maud, and suddenly Win Butler's there, and we're talking to him, and his buddy sits down, and they bring out all this like Caribbean liquor of some sort. I forgot what it was, and it's incredible, like Haitian food. And suddenly we're like doing drinks with Arcade Fire, and now I'm hammered with my daughter with Arcade Fire, and we're having like the greatest afternoon ever. I'm sure to her it was more traumatizing of just being intimidated, but she was really funny. And I used to do a joke on stage where I said, and I realized something, that my daughter's way cooler drunk. Like, she was so funny. It's the worst thing you could say. Like, now when she's not drunk, I'm like, I like the other you better.
That might be good new potential material. I remember when I lived in Amsterdam, my father came and visited me.
Yeah.
And I thought it was important that I wanted to get high with my dad.
Yeah.
And so we went to a coffee shop, and it wasn't that good of an idea, because he wouldn't shut up.
Yeah.
He just, oh my God. And I used to love going to your Little League games. And you know what? You were really good, man. You were a good hitter. And he's just like going on and on. I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
I thought it would be like, we'd have this like chilled, great conversation.
That's
but it
funny.
was like, he got all amped up and just.
He became a chatterbox.
You became a chatterbox.
So that was great going to Just for Laughs. We went to see Maria Bamford perform, and we saw Oh Hello with Mulaney and Kroll. That was really like a special parent trip.
That's great. I love comedy so much. And, like being at the Comedy Store, like I was there Saturday night, and then I got there an hour and a half early to watch comedians, and then I stayed until the end of the night, and just running back and forth from the OR to the main room to see who's on.
Yeah, that's funny.
And just how people are expressing themselves, the difference in personalities, like you were talking about before, angry people or sweet people. It's just such a beautiful rainbow of humanity. And I think comedy's better than it's ever been, because there's more diversity and more, it's not just like straight white guys like it was in the 80s mostly.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely deeper. I mean, that's part of what I tried to capture in the book. I got, Hassan Minhaj and Rami and Mindy Kaling and Amber Ruffin, and I tried to like open it up, because like when I started, it really was all just like, the people that I grew up with on Long Island. It was Paul Reiser and Jerry Seinfeld and Dangerfield, and those people are still like the legends and the best. But there's so many incredible people from all sorts of other communities. And when I started, at the Improv, it wasn't like that. I used to host the whole night at the Improv from 8 o'clock till 1:30 in the morning. And most nights there'd be one or two women on a very long lineup, and maybe like one black comedian, and that was kind of it.
I moved to San Francisco in 1990. Gay comedians didn't play at the regular clubs.
Yeah.
They had Josie's Cabaret and Juice Joint in the Castro district.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable to think that even gay comedians weren't.
Yeah. Or there were gay comedians who wouldn't say they were gay.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people like that you knew it and they were funny, and maybe the crowd knew it too, but they didn't talk about it explicitly.
I love the diversity now. And Hassan Minhaj, his Prom King, I love that special, that first special that kind of put him on the map. I know we've been rambling for a while, so I should probably start to wrap this up. I want to ask you or tell you just a couple things. How did the pandemic, because like I was telling you, I had like the greatest first half of the pandemic before I witnessed the suicide and everything. How did the pandemic, how did you cope with it? And how did it change you as a person? Because we were talking about before about, I don't know if how you mentioned it about getting back into stand-up, like coming out of the pandemic after so much time off, I feel like I'm starting over.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really exciting about that. I'm not doing the road. I'm just doing it for the love of writing jokes like I did when I was a teenager, when I started. And I think there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, when the pandemic started, I was just in a panic, about all of it. I had all, the kids in the house and I can go to like a dark place. So I'm the one running around the house. I'm the one who dies, and then I had to release The King of Staten Island. So it was weird because I had to promote this movie while I'm in lockdown in the house. So it feels strange because on one level, I'm having a great experience being around my kids at a time when I think they wouldn't have hung out with me. So we're all connecting, and that's beautiful. And I just got to know them much better and got to know them a little bit as adults. Maud was 22, 23, and Iris was 16, 17, and it was a nice moment to to connect and be real with each other because something was happening, and the parental relationship was adjusting to what it becomes when they move out, which is you're an advisor that they can listen to or not. And then I started getting a little stir crazy, and I could feel the family getting stir crazy. And so I wrote that movie, The Bubble, and we went to England to shoot it because I thought, we got to get out of here. We're going to go crazy. And I couldn't think of anything except to write about what was happening, which was the pandemic. So I made, the choice. I don't know if anyone's going to make a big comedy about this moment, but I'll try. I'll give it a shot. So we made this really kind of funny, crazy movie. And like some people are split on it. And I think that's because it is about like the plague. I didn't expect everyone to go all in on it because for a lot of people, they're like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not ready to joke about it. I would say to people, they say about jokes like, oh, too soon. And with The Bubble, it's like, no, it's not even too soon. It's now.
Yeah.
There's no space. But it felt right to talk about it. And I think the movie came out really well. And as it ages, it'll be fun because I don't think there's going to be another movie.
It'd be another 100 years until another pandemic.
That talks about it. And so I think it's a great...
Oh, you don't think like we had all those Vietnam era movies?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in the comedy vein. I think people are going to, there'll be something. But it is wild to go, well, we took the shot at that moment. And we weren't really trying to write about, disease and the pain of it. We were trying to write about isolation and what you think about and the ways you melt down and your boss trying to keep you working even though the world is falling apart, and trying to keep your ego going and to still believe you're a movie star when like the world doesn't even exist anymore. And that was the source of the comedy. And now I look back as the pandemic has hopefully, in its end stage, and think, wow, I must have been manic as hell that during the pandemic, I made a movie, a book, and a documentary, and worked on the Billy Eichner movie Bros, which comes out in the fall, this romantic comedy that we just did.
Oh, I love Billy Eichner. Billy on the Street.
Oh, he's so funny. The movie's great.
Billy on the Street is one of the things that helped me during the dark days of the pandemic too. Watching those,
hard funny,
hilarious.
and so I thought, whatever I thought I was thinking or doing, I was completely fooling myself. So I couldn't even tell you what the change was or what
do you
I
mean, how were you
took
fooling
from
you?
it.
I mean, you were creative.
I was just in pure workaholism in a way that I thought I wasn't. I thought I was chill. I thought I was just hanging. And then suddenly there's like 4 projects. I'm like, oh, you are a lunatic out of your mind. And you only work that hard because you don't want to sit in your own head.
Well, I like that you did a creative project to get the family out of the house and out of the country. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was, and it was a great experience, and we had so much fun. But I'm not sure what I took from it. And I think that's why I haven't really written the stand-up yet, because the only thing that really matters to me, I think generally, is I wish people were just nicer to each other. Or I wish people tried to take care of each other. And so there's been something about this era where we've seen the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Even now with like abortion, being at risk, and people are like, oh, I don't want to wear a mask, but I want to control your uterus.
Yeah.
There's been so much stuff like that it is a little disheartening to think, yeah, there's a lot of people that are really pretty rough.
Pretty nasty.
And I get that people disagree and they're religious and they look at things differently, but there's a lot of cruelty out there on all sides of things. But that's the bummer for me. And I think that was the bummer for George Carlin, was, wow, we have this great opportunity. We're fucking it up. We're not, we should be the country where we're all happy to wear a mask. We're all happy to do anything that would save any life or make anyone's life easier.
Yeah, I think the most astounding thing about the last 5 years is the true nature of a lot of people that's been revealed. The selfishness and the cruelty.
Yeah, I don't want to be put out. Like, people are like cheering that they don't have to wear a mask on a plane. It's not hard to wear a mask on a plane. I did it constantly. It literally was like nothing.
Yeah.
Who's celebrating that they don't have to wear the mask on the plane? I mean, if anyone dies or it spreads at all, isn't it worth doing it? Like,
just the fact that they came up with the vaccine like 3 months later.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really one of the greatest scientific achievements in human history, that they figured out the genome or whatever it is for that vaccine 3 months later instead of 3 years, 30 years down the road. And that a huge portion of the population said, yeah, I ain't taking it.
Yeah. And like it's evil.
Yeah.
Like, really, it's like one of the best thing that's ever happened. And you know what? When you get cancer, you're going to get the chemo. Like, you can't hate medicine. You can't hate science. You just think maybe you can avoid needing it. But the second you need medicine because you get sick, you're going to take medicine. And so, yeah, I mean, I understand the issues of people are saying, I control what I put in my body. And that's the thing that, comes up. Like, all right, well, are we a society of people trying to make choices to help all of us? Or are we every person for themselves? And like, for me personally, I'm always willing to do the thing to help everybody. I'm not going to be the person that's like, yeah, I don't trust that thing. Like, we're all in or we're all out.
On a sinking ship, wouldn't you help people get on the life preservers? And
I don't know anyone who's had that big of trouble with the vaccine. I know some people are like, I had a hard time, but for the most part, we know thousands of people. We're out there in the world. It's been fine. And there's always exceptions with any shot where people die, things happen. But for the most part, how many people die with the shot, without the shot? We need it. So that's made me sad. Just the polarization, the rage, Mitch McConnell, the most important thing to him, and he's on the record, is to make sure Obama gets nothing accomplished.
Yeah.
Like, government's for both sides, is supposed to be about, what do we do together to make everyone's lives better?
Yeah.
And the game of it
how
so
everything
terrible.
is politicized and weaponized like that, and then for the pandemic and the vaccine and mask wearing and all that really was and is mind blowing.
Trump's not admitting he got the vaccine for so long.
Yeah, what?
And he worked on getting it invented.
Yeah.
And I feel like that spun me out too, is the amount of gaslighting. And there's definitely kind of a liberal side to that because there's gamesmanship everywhere. But the massive gaslighting of, there's 7 cases and it's going to be 0 in a couple of weeks when they know what's coming. I think it's traumatizing. I think we're all traumatized.
I think we've all been traumatized, definitely, through the past few years. My mother, who I absolutely adore and am very close with, she wouldn't get the vaccine because she thinks the vaccine was a government conspiracy to kill old people so that they don't have to pay them their Social Security.
Yeah.
And
was she like that kind of a thinker beforehand, or that's a new way of thinking about the world?
It's something that I thought about. Like, I remember 10, 15 years ago when I would drive into Austin, Texas to do gigs. On the local radio was this guy, Alex Jones.
Yeah.
And he was really popular just in that Austin area. He was just on this local radio station. I remember like tuning in and I would think, wow, this guy's, he's got some wacky ideas and shit. And I always thought he was a bizarre thing, like a freak on a circus sideshow thing. I never expected that to become our country or my mother.
Yeah.
And that's, like, for me, the most frightening thing about America today is just how so many people are filled with whacked out theories and conspiracies.
Yeah.
You know?
And it doesn't seem like it's going to get better. No. I feel like, and this is what Carlin talked about, that corporate forces want to keep you distracted with all of this while they take billions of dollars in tax breaks. So they want you to think, let's not help students and alleviate student loans while we give billions to other industries and rich corporations. That it is on purpose. You know, getting everyone fighting. Like, if you get everyone to fight about abortion, maybe you could hold on to power, right? Democrats on some level are like, we might hold on to Congress because they took away abortion, and Republicans are like, we gotta rev up our base to keep us in power. And so these issues aren't resolved based on the issue; they're based on how does it affect voting. You know, they're meant to incite people.
It's just this constant manufacturing of anger. And I think, you know, we had a war on drugs. We had a war on terrorism. I think we should have a war on anger now. Yeah. We should try and be eliminating all this anger that everybody's just so pissed off all the time.
And now they know that people respond to it. So they go, oh, if you're angry, you stay on Facebook longer.
Yeah.
You stay on Twitter longer. And so, and we're not making an adjustment as people. So they know I can just keep tweaking you and you'll stay on. And the longer you stay on, the more ads you see, the more money we make. And now I'm training you to be pissed all day long. And then you get on an airplane and you punch the flight attendant. I mean,
that's how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you just real quick. Speaking of my mother, who I adore, I took her to see Trainwreck when it came out. And my mother's a very she's 83 now, so however old she was, what was that, 5 years ago? I can't remember. I remember seeing you right after the film, and I remember telling you how impressed I was with LeBron James's acting for an athlete, that he seemed so natural. But what I didn't have a chance to tell you in our short talk right after I saw you was I had brought my very religious mother, and one of the greatest laughs I've ever had in a movie theater. In the beginning of the film, there's the muscular actor, I forget his name. He's
John Cena.
He's got this huge erect cock,
and the towel on.
And the towel is hanging from his erect cock, and just how uncomfortable I could feel my mother was sitting next to me. I think I laughed so hard in the theater watching that moment was so, and she didn't find that very funny, but that moment was so much more funny, feeling how uncomfortable my mother was. So,
secretly, she enjoyed it.
She probably. She's on his Facebook group. And then the other thing, when the pandemic hit, my mother was visiting me. And she was 81 at the time when the pandemic hit. So that was like, you were talking about how you bonded with your family in that time. She was with me for the first 4 months of the pandemic. And even when I was a kid and lived at home, my mom worked. I never got all this unadulterated time with her. And so it was really great. The first month she didn't leave the apartment, and I would go out once a week for food. But then the second, third, and fourth months were great. We would go for walks twice a day in the neighborhood. We would learn about. There's an app called Picture This, where you can take pictures of trees or flowers, and it'll tell you the name and the origin. Wow. I never knew there are magnolia trees all down Beverly, and there's all these exotic trees and flowers in the neighborhood. We played Scrabble every day, and then we watched movies. And so I have this older religious mother, and I'm trying to stick to mostly comedies and things like that. And I thought for sure she's gonna love Bridesmaids. I think Bridesmaids is one of the greatest comedies ever made. Yeah. And then it's a woman's movie. So like, how can this go wrong with my mom? And then the Brazilian steakhouse post, they're trying on the dresses, and everybody gets diarrhea. And wow, my mom really didn't find that funny. Melissa McCarthy shitting in a sink? I mean, come on.
You don't even see the shit. Come on, that's conservative comedy.
That's one of the funniest moments in film history. And
that's funny. I remember seeing Animal House with my mom when I was like 10. And just there's that like hand job scene in the car where she's got the plastic glove on. There's a couple of scenes I was like, oh geez.
I remember going to the theater with my mom to see Life of Brian.
Oh wow.
And a very Christian woman did not find that.
There's some stuff in there.
Did not find that funny. So, well, I can't thank you enough for being on my podcast, Judd. What is the greatest advice you were ever given as a comedian?
As a comedian, well, the best advice I got from a bunch of people is that it would take 7 years to figure out how your voice on stage. And I think it set me to a certain level of patience that just comedy takes a long time. You know, we've done a lot of movies, and some of them, like the Billy Eichner movie, they were working on it for 4 years. Billy Eichner and Nick Stoller on the script. So a certain level of patience in comedy. And I think, once I think Mike Nichols said, if you come up with one great idea a day, that's a lot. And that helped me because I thought, okay, I just need to generate a lot of ideas. And if every day one of them is really good, I've succeeded. And for some reason that helped me a lot. But the biggest thing I think in comedy is just to write. Just get your ass in the chair every day and just take a moment to connect with yourself and see what's there and ramble and then, like you said, like George Carlin said, you write and then a day or two later you look at it. He did it stoned when he looked at it, but you don't have to be stoned. But it's good to have a session where you write and you don't censor yourself. You get rid of your critical voice and you just babble. And then another day you put your critical voice back on and you judge it. And you go, oh, this is worthwhile. This is not. This is. And I think that, which someone called the down-up theory, get it down and then fix it up.
Yeah, and I think somebody said, was it in the Carlin doc or in the book, that not enough comedians do that. Spend the time of sitting there and writing, which is the beauty of me not being on the road now. Is I have time to do the good things like that. What is the best advice you've ever been given as a filmmaker and a storyteller? As
a storyteller, there's certain things I usually remember. His name is John DeGuar. He wrote like The House of Blue Leaves. He was talking about plays, and he says, in a play, it's just you have a character, you put him in a corner, and you see how they fight their way out of it. And that to me is enough to go, okay, so someone's going through life, and then something happens, and then they have to deal with it. And for me, those types of ideas, I keep it so simple, right? Like you get a person pregnant, what do? That's the movie. And I try to keep it that simple. Life is about, like some people, they say, oh, it's like Seinfeld, it's no lessons, but for most people, like that's a choice, right? But for most stories, it really is, what is the lesson? A lot of times when I work with people, I'll think, what is your problem? And in a story, what would have to happen to you for you to get it and make a change?
I love it. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice for the people of the earth?
For the people of the earth?
Yeah.
At the end of the George Carlin documentary, we did this big montage of current politics with his jokes over it.
I love it. It was like a fireworks display at the end of the documentary.
And that was really important because we spent a month just on that, like 5 minutes. And then we tell the story of how he passed. And we cut to the end of a show. And at the end of the show, he just says, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And that always makes me cry because you think he's so dark, but really that's all he wanted people to know. Take care of yourself, take care of each other.
I love it. Judd, I love you with all my heart.
Love you, buddy.
Long may you run, brother. Thanks
I didn't bullshit you.
Not whatsoever.
I meant it. I was here, and I'll be here again.